everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. We are in for a treat today, everyone. We have a most amazing guest who is also a part of the Top 3 Book Workshop with me. And I just read her book, and you are going to be so excited as a leader who is trying to improve yourself and be a better leader. This is the book for you. I'm so excited to have Margaret Andrews here with me, and she has a amazing career. Let me just share a few highlights. She is an accountant from Deloitte originally. She's a speaker, author of the new book, Manage Yourself to Lead Others, Why Great Leadership Begins with Self-Understanding, which is based on her most popular graduate program at Harvard. She's also taught at MIT, and she has now founded the Milo Center, a leadership education and professional development firm. Amazing. So let's get started. I'd love to hear you just do an intro of whatever else you might want to share.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me here. It's so nice to be here. And I think you hit the highlights, but I will say I'm very glad to be here. So thank you.
Yes. Okay. So you have a really big mission, and I just want to share it because I think it's important because there is a nuance to it. You're on a mission to transform the craft of leadership because better leadership leads to a better world. And the nuance about the craft of leadership, I don't think is something I've ever heard before. And I'd love to have you share a little bit more about why this is your mission.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I think it's leadership is not an art and it's not a science. It's something that I think we bring what we have with us or from us to it. And I
Mhm.
think that's a good thing. I oftentimes will say to people, there's really no best way of leading. There are some that are not as good, right? But your way of doing it may be different from my way of doing it. And that's because we're very different people. We have different backgrounds, different values, different ambitions, all of these kinds of things. And also our contexts are different. You might lead
Mhm.
differently if you're in a startup versus, a big conglomerate. And we lead differently at different ages and stages of our life. And the thing is that, and speaking of leadership just for a moment in terms of organizations, whether they're for profit or not for profit, is that we spend a lot of time at work. And we also spend a lot of time when we're not at work thinking about work. And the leadership that we have in those organizations matters. If you've ever had a great boss, you know that you look forward to Monday, right? And it's like, yay, I get to do this again. And if you have a not so good one, it sometimes ruins your weekend. And so, if we could have better leadership in teams, in organizations, in society, that the world would actually be a better place. So, and I always think, yeah, that's a big mission. But I also think if we can do a little bit at a time, just, if we can raise our own level 1%, 2%, uh, you know, it adds up.
It could make such a difference, right? Oh, and I think people think it's a big, big change. And I think it's those little steps along the way that help you keep improving. And just taking a few of the things that you have in your book, even and starting there, would be a great step forward for so many people.
Oh, thanks.
So I'm curious how you got this program started at Harvard
Mm. Hmm.
because the way you talk about it sounds so impressive, and there's a wait list every time you offer it. And I can see why after reading the book. But how did that all get started for you?
Yeah. So it all started with something that happened to me, and that was, earlier in my career, I thought I was hitting it out of the park. And my boss told me, in no uncertain terms, that I lacked self awareness and I didn't understand how my behaviors impacted others. He went on to say I was overly ambitious and, this, that, and the other. And boy, was I taken aback because, I thought I was doing a great job and, was bringing in results and had multiple promotions, etc. But, when I really sat down and thought about it, I realized that he was right and that I could be impatient and demanding and things like that. And that made some people on my team feel anxious and maybe unappreciated. And that was never my intention, but it was the result. And so I wanted to change that result. So I started looking for insights from anywhere I could find it. So, it was from famous leaders, people I knew, management books, academic studies, history, philosophy, psychology, right? I kind of nerded out on this. And as I was, kind of looking for, I will say, the answer, I found an answer that was different than what I was expecting. And that was what became the heart of the class and the book. And that is that we have to understand and manage ourselves before we can effectively lead others. So it's really an inside out proposition, which is why, as I said earlier, there's really no one right way to lead. And that's because we're all very unique individuals, and that's exactly the way it should be. We shouldn't all try to be the same, because I'm not going to be a good version of you because you are you, but I can be a better version of myself. And so, that was what started the whole thing. And then, I decided several years later that I should think about teaching other people what I had learned, because it made a big difference for me. And so, if you've seen the movie Alien, you would remember that scene when the alien comes bursting out of that person's chest. And I say that is how the class was born. It was just in me and had to come out. So that's how it started. And I've been teaching it for close to 20 years. Not all that long ago, I went back and looked at my slides, from the first running of it. And oh my goodness, how embarrassing. They were terrible slides. But when I looked at it, the arc of the class is the same, what I was conveying. And now it's different, right? I used some different stories, different cases, different assignments and things like that. And I learned from my students too, also what's working and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you have some amazing examples and stories in the book that really allude to the fact of how many people have been through it, first of all, which is incredible. And just all the learnings that they're having, these aha moments, the blind spots that they're finding for themselves. And the initial first story and the introduction of this person raising his hand about an example you were talking about in a case study was so amazing, right? For him to see himself in that case study and
Oh,
say, yeah, that's me.
yeah. That was probably one of the bravest things I've ever heard somebody say in a classroom. And what was so amazing, and so people that don't know the story, we were talking about this case about this Dr. Ron Ventura, who's this brilliant surgeon who is also a bully. And so, you have two sides. He's bringing in revenue and all of this sort of stuff, and he's also hollowing out the organization. People are leaving, et cetera. And so we have the role of his boss to say, what do we do? Do we keep this guy and try to coach him, or do we get rid of him, et cetera? And it's super impassioned discussion. And just as we're wrapping up the discussion, I noticed this hand raised in the back of the room, and it's James, who has not spoken the whole 2 days we've been together. And so I call on him, and he says, I'm Dr. Ventura. And, just like in the movies, right, where you see everybody turn around at the same time, that's exactly what happened in this room. And he realizes kind of what he said, and he goes, "Oh, not the real Dr. Ventura." he said, "I'm an engineer, not a surgeon." But he said, basically everything else in that case could have been written about me. He said, I'm an excellent engineer. He said, but I've been a terrible teammate and manager. And he said, that's why I'm here. I was recently passed over for a promotion, and if I don't fix this, I'm probably going to get fired. And what was so amazing was, first of all, that he said that, and he told me later. He said, I debated the whole time we were talking about that case whether I should say this. He was also the person everyone wanted to talk to at the break, which made me, it was so powerful what he said, and it made me realize there's a lot more Dr. Venturas out there, or people that
Mhm.
fear that they're Dr. Ventura.
Yeah.
And it just had such a happy ending too, because, he in the next, I think it was year, he got that promotion. And then within the next 4 years, he had two more. So, he took it to heart. And, he really dove in. And I just love it because he shared something that I think helped everybody else.
Yeah. I think the vulnerability of that is so relatable for so many people who probably inside have some form of those Dr. Ventura pieces to them, but maybe not as much, and are worried about how
Mm.
they're showing up and if they could be better, but they just don't know the steps to take. So, what a
Hmm.
brave individual for sure.
Absolutely.
That's
I
so
agree.
cool. if people are looking at your book and your class is for graduate students, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So, but your book is written for high achievers in general, right? Anyone who's really trying to build their leadership skills in a bigger way. How are you hoping that this book changes them?
Yeah, I find that the kind of the sweet spot for my class is people that have, as I say, been around the block and oftentimes hit a wall, right? And that's why they're there. They may not be James, but when you're new in the world of work, whether it's for profit or not for or anything that you do, uh, there's a sense that it's easy or obvious how you work with other people, right? Common sense, right? But when you get into the work world, I think you realize the truth of that saying is, common sense is not that common. And we all have different ideas of what excellence looks like or kindness or, performance or these kinds of things. And so a lot of times if I have people in there that have never managed somebody, I think they're probably kind of internally rolling their eyes going, well, duh, right? Like, of course. But once you've been out in the work world and you realize the pressures that you're under and things like that, you realize, no, 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 this is a whole lot harder than it sounds. And I think we've all probably had this happen that, before you get promoted, you think, oh man, when I'm in that position, here's what I'm going to do. And oh, they're so, what are they thinking up there? And then you get into that position, you realize, because now you have a different vantage point, right? You see things differently and you realize, oh, you know, those guys weren't as dumb as I thought they were, right? Like, whoa, this is harder. And oh, there are different constraints than I thought. And it's just a different world every time you move up.
We used to talk about, when you close the door, people think some kind of magic is happening behind the closed door and that we're learning
Yes.
all the super secret stuff. And I was like, yeah, believe me, we're not learning anything different than what you're learning, honestly.
Mm.
So, one of the greatest exercises at the beginning of the book in chapter 1 is about identifying the best person you have ever worked for.
Mhm.
And I would love for you to just share kind of an overview of that. And then I want to tell you a little bit about my experience with it after.
Oh, awesome. Great. Yeah. So, for those people that, haven't heard of it, I'll kind of do it really quickly. And if you're listening to this, just stop it and do it. And then, so you don't ruin it for yourself. I ask people to think of the very best boss they've ever had. And it has to be somebody they worked directly for. So it can't be a skip level or somebody they wish they had worked for in the organization. It can't be a celebrity CEO unless you work for that person. And it can't be Ted Lasso, right? It has to be somebody you work directly with. And so people get that in mind. And then I say, okay, now take out a pen and paper and write down all the reasons why this person was your best boss. The big reasons, the small reasons, the ones that you think everybody appreciated about this person, or maybe just you did. And I go on about all these different ones that keep coming up to just, jog people's mind about what it could be. And once you get going, right, and you can't just say, oh, they were a good leader. I was like, what does that mean? Right? What is it that you really appreciate about this person? And so I asked them to get a minimum of 5 and hopefully more than 8. And once they do that, okay, so stop the recording and get your 8. And I asked them, I say, now the harder part is go back and choose the top 3. Choose the top 3. They might have been the first 3 that you thought of, might have been the last 3 that you thought of, or something in between. So all the ones that are on your list are important, but these are the most important ones. These are the ones that really made the difference. So they do that. And then I share with them that, I've run this exercise for close to 20 years with, thousands of people from all over the world, every industry, different levels, et cetera. And I say, the answers that you wrote down and your top 3 almost always fall into one of 3 buckets. And the first bucket is around intelligence. So, this person was so smart, could solve, all kinds of problems. It's really what I'm going to say, raw cognitive intelligence, right? And so then I ask people how many of yours were in that bucket. And, so it's usually 0 or 1. And then I say, okay, the second bucket is technical and functional skills. And these are things like, they were the best person coding in R, or they knew the ins and outs of the tax code like no one else, or, they knew constitutional law better than anybody in the office, or whatever it is, right? Technical or functional skill. So I ask people, how many of yours were in that? And it's usually 0 or 1. Occasionally we get 2 on that one. And then I say, okay, the third bucket is interpersonal skills, also known as relationship skills or soft skills or emotional intelligence or human skills, right? It goes by many, many different names. And then I ask people how many are in that bucket. And most people have between 2 and 3 are there. And so when I do this in a room, live with people where we're all together, we use Post-it notes and we put them on the wall. And visually, it's very overwhelming to people, right? It's like, wow, I thought it was just me that, valued these things. I'm like, no, it's everybody in this room. And by the way, it's everybody I've ever done this with. And about, I don't know how many years ago it was, I thought, these results always come out more or less the same. I wonder what the numbers are. So, I started taking down those Post-it notes, bringing them home and putting them in an Excel spreadsheet, and found that 85% of the reasons that people give of their top 3 why somebody was their best boss are in that interpersonal skills bucket, and the remaining 15% is relatively evenly split between intelligence and technical and functional skills. And I also say it does not mean that intelligence and technical or functional skills are not important. They are, but they're threshold skills. They are oftentimes what got people to a certain level, but when you start leading other people, those interpersonal skills become significantly, relatively more important.
Yes, 100%. So I did the exercise and
Mm.
I went through my 8 list. And when I read your description of the interpersonal skills, I had this emotional reaction
Oh.
of really thinking about the difference that this person made for me, mostly because he pushed me out of my comfort zone. He
Mhm.
trusted me to do things that probably, were a little scary for me, he knew, but he gave it to me anyway. And I knew he was there in the background should I need him, but he really let me run. And I think that is something that is a gift, honestly, because it
Yes.
allowed me to make mistakes. It allowed me to try things. And I learned from his style of dealing with conflict and
Mm.
how he did that, because that was just not easy for me. It's still never easy for me. But I think I've learned a lot of things since then. But I just really appreciate him so much for all of the things that he did for me publicly and privately, that I think is just a real gift for me. And I wish more people had those experiences. What I'm finding now, I'm just curious about your perspective because you're talking to so many people. What feels like to me to be true is that leaders may not know how to lead. They haven't been given, a course like yours or a book like yours to read. And I think they struggle. They look at other people and think, oh, well, that's
Mhm,
what they're
mhm.
doing. Or I learned from this manager and it wasn't great, but that's all I know. So I'm just going to take it and run with it. I'm just curious, how are you seeing kind of the world of leadership right now?
Yeah, I think it's wide and varied, really. But I think what you're talking about is true, has always been true, and continues to be true in a large swath of it. I know some people talk about being accidental leaders, right? That they were a member of the team and they were chosen to lead the team, or those kinds of things, and they get there and think, oh my gosh, what do I do? And so I think that is very true. And I think that is how we learn. How do we learn to parent? By, it's kind of how our parents parented us. And sometimes we
Yeah.
say, well, that worked, so let's keep doing it. And sometimes like, well, that didn't work, so I'm going to do the opposite. And I think the same is true of leadership. If you had somebody that was very successful in an organization and they led a certain way, you think, hey, that's how it's done. And you may have had a really great example Or you may have had a really bad example, but you don't know that because that's just what you've seen. So, leaders are role modeling all the time, whether they know it or not. So I do think that we bring our whole selves to it. And, we may think that the best way to get people to achieve results is to yell at people, or other people think the best way to get results is to talk to people. Or right, so, and as I say, we're bringing all of ourselves to it. It's how we were raised. It's the people we've worked with. It's what we've been rewarded for or punished for in our life. And so, yes, I think and also you kind of alluded to this earlier. It's a lot about trial and error that, you think something, but it's not always what you thought, right? And I think this goes to a big part of what, I had to learn, and I think a lot of people have to learn, is that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but other people judge us by our behaviors, and sometimes we feel misunderstood because, well, can't you see? I really want the best for everybody, and it's people might say, well, no, we can't see that.
And I think that's true. And I try to, people I'm coaching, they'll say, I just don't understand why my boss is doing this. And why would they be that way? And, that's not working for our team, whatever it is. And I'll say, you don't know what's happening for them, first of all.
Yeah.
You have to have a little bit of compassion initially, right? To have those conversations of, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to support
Hmm.
you? Try to go in from that perspective. And I think it changes the way the relationship is built
Hmm.
then from that point forward. And that person may continue to do the things that are not necessarily supportive and helpful to the team, but at least you've tried to do something. I think it just empowers the person to recognize
Hmm.
that they're just people, right? They don't have all the
Yeah.
answers. They're not perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is just what you said is so, so important. We're all just people, right? We all put our pants on one leg at a time. I just think if we remembered that we would all just chill a little bit
Hmm.
and just not get so upset about things.
I think that people put a lot of expectations on leaders to be perfect or what they perceive as perfect. I was at a speaking event the other day, and one of the people said to me, shouldn't my manager just tell me what my next role is? Shouldn't they be the one that decides that? And I said, I mean, you can let them do that if you want to, but I'm not sure that may be the role that you want, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of misunderstandings of the role of a leader versus a manager and versus what, that role should do or not do. And so it's just interesting to me whenever I'm out speaking to hear some of the questions that I get that people have expectations of them that
Mhm.
they probably don't even know. that
Yes, I
those
think that's absolutely true, right? And even if you and I worked for the same person, we would probably have different expectations for
Yeah.
that person. Or
Yeah.
if we managed the same, 5 people or something like that, we would do it differently.
Can you share a little bit about your managing yourself model? And the language that I loved in here is you take people from where you are current state to transformative impact, which I
Mm.
loved that language.
Mm.
Can you share a little bit about what that looks like and how you came up with that?
Yeah. So I start off with whatever your current state is. I oftentimes have 3 questions and 6 questions, and and they're kind of related. So the first question out of the 3 is, what type of leader are you now? Right? Is it what words and phrases do you use to describe yourself? What do other people use or you think they use? And then the second question is, what kind of leader would you like to be? What words and phrases would you like to be able to use or for them to use? And then, of course, the third question is, well, what's the difference right, between where you are now and where you want to be? And that gives you an idea of where you want to go. But there are 6 questions that can help you with that first question. And this is, things about your background, your influences, events and situations in your life, your definition of success, values, how well you understand your own emotions, and feedback that you've received in your life personally and professionally, right? So all of these things kind of go into who you are as a leader. And so the idea is wherever you are in your current state, to do this introspection, this, self-understanding exercise about, hey, how was I influenced? Who were those people that influenced me and what were their ideas? And now that I'm older, do those ideas still work for me? Because a lot of times we're carrying around things that, might have worked when you were 7, but, now that we're older, maybe not so much, and different situations that shape our lives. So the idea is that you do these exercises in self-understanding, and that gives you insight. That gives you insight into yourself and, how you became the person that you are. And then you can think about, okay, where do I want to be? Right? Where do I want to be? And therefore, what do I need to work on? Maybe I need to work on delegating more or being more present for people or listening more or, the list goes on and on. So pick off one of those and work on it. When you work on one skill, whether it's listening or delegating or, giving people the benefit of the doubt or any of the ones that people want to work on, the thing is we're not good at it at first. If you've ever tried to change any of your behaviors, you know what I'm saying is true. It sounds so easy. Well, just, don't interrupt. Well, yeah, it sounds so easy. So the idea is that we get better slowly and then quickly, and then we level off, right? It's kind of like an S curve. And that's how we get better. We make mistakes, that old saying of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And to me, that's kind of what it is. And so that gets you to a transformative impact. And that is that you are proud of yourself that you did it. And everyone on your team, whether it's your boss or, people that report to you, your peers, etc., see a difference and they behave differently. So that's
Mhm.
how you get yourself and other people more towards that transformative impact.
You mentioned a quote in the book about self awareness. So, although 95% of people think they're self aware, only 10 to 15% actually are. And I think this exercise of this model helps people start to gain some self awareness because you're right. Anything you try to do differently, it's like a habit now. You just don't even realize that you're doing it. But that self awareness, building that self awareness to a bigger level, helps you start to pay attention more to it so that you
Mhm.
can stop and shift and make a change.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other, I thought you were going to go for a different quote because a lot of people
Oh,
tell me that that's their favorite one, which is one of my favorites, and it's the one by C.S. Lewis where he says, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." And I like to remind people of that as they're going back through their life and saying, "Okay, who influenced me?" Right? These are people that helped you and people that hurt you. Right? And sometimes lots of people have things in their background that they don't really like to think about anymore. And that's why I
mhm,
always bring up that quote because I think it's so powerful,
yeah.
right? Yeah, that was your beginning. May not have been the one you wanted, but that's yours. But, what do you want to do with it now?
And you can change it at any time. I think there's always this, well, I'll get to that sometime, or it's so big, I don't even know where to start, so I'm not going to do anything. And I try to make it practical for people when I'm coaching them. Let's pick one thing that you could do differently. Raise your hand in a meeting, speak up, mentor someone. You can do all of these things very simply, but don't make it a big mountain to climb. Just make it something simple to start with, a baby step. It doesn't
A
have to be big.
baby step. I agree. But the most important thing I think is just starting, right? And are you going to make
Hmm.
mistakes? Of course, you're going to make
Yes, yes.
mistakes.
But remember your why that you're trying to
Yeah,
get to that transformative impact. It's a
exactly.
good why. Okay, so the next part I thought was really interesting. Leadership begins with giving people a reason to follow us. And you talk about setting a vision, inspiring people to be a part of that vision and accomplish it, and the trust that that leader is going to get you there. And I think that is so important because I've seen some leaders who I think expect everyone to automatically follow them
Mhm,
just because they have
mhm.
the title, but are not, talk about the bully situation, right? They're just not someone that anyone wants to follow. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that and how you have seen that evolve for people in your class or other people you've worked with.
Yeah, there's actually a story that I love in the book, and it was a former student who allowed me to use it. I use this exercise all the time because it's great at surfacing these things. But she said that she had an idea of how they should approach this exercise as a team, right? It's a competitive exercise in the class. And so she said she just ramrodded it right through and was telling people what way they were going to do, et cetera. And she said they didn't win. She said actually they lost handily. I think she said
Mm.
theirs was the worst. And she said, and so then I have teams debrief, right? And get feedback from each other. And I give it in a very structured way. And she got this feedback from people that she was a bully and, she didn't listen to other people. And she said, as hard as that was to hear, she realized, my gosh, I do that all the time. And she said, and here it is showing up in a low stake situation, right? This is a class. You're not graded on it, right? There's no benefit. You get no benefit for winning other than bragging rights. And she said, and here it showed up. And she said, oh, that was like the best thing. And so I think that a lot of times, we are throughout our life, think about in school, you are rewarded for being smart, having
Mhm.
quote unquote the right answer, and being a subject matter in whatever it is, calculus or, American history or something like that. And so we bring that into the workplace, but it's not a competition. We're interdependent. And I think that's where we get in trouble with these things.
Mhm. Wow, that's really impactful, right? For her to see it in that situation. And I remember those moments where we're doing things as a team in the company and just like there's this inherent need to win. I don't know. There's something about creating this little competition between us that I think, of course, is purposeful. But it was really interesting to see that. I had definitely felt that myself at times, depending on
I think a lot
was
of us have.
who
Yeah.
was chosen as the leader. And if they're not leading, then it's like, okay, could I help you? Like, let me
Yes.
just,
Or move aside. I'm going
yeah,
to help you.
let me take it over,
Yes.
which is also one of the outcomes that people were sometimes looking for is did someone step
Yeah.
in, right? Which so it's also teaching like you don't just leave a leader who's ineffective in place. You might need to make a change. And so
Yeah.
I don't know, it's always good learnings coming out of those. Okay, so I want to read something to you that you had a quote and it's A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. And I think
Mm.
it works perfectly for this podcast for visibility, but also for what we're talking about with leadership. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. Why was that quote important for you to have in the book?
Because I think it's true. The first time I ever heard or saw that quote, I should say, was when I watched the movie. I think it came out in 2005, Aquila and the Bee. If you
Hmm.
haven't seen it, it's a great movie. And it's the story of this little girl who is kind of pushed into doing the spelling bee and she wins. And her school principal and teacher are very excited because they think, hey, she's good. She could go on to the Scripps National Spelling Bee. She's not really excited about it. But they get her a coach and a linguist. It happens to be Lawrence Fishburne. And so the story is about how he teaches her to be a better speller. And it's also about what she teaches him. And it's a lovely movie. But there's a scene in the movie when they first get together, when he's going to coach her, and he has her go over to this wall and read something. And it's this quote. And I remember like getting chills when she read it because I thought, oh my gosh, I think that's true. I never thought of it that way. That we are more afraid of how powerful we can be, how powerful we actually are, that, we sort of put ourselves in a container. And I thought, I think that's true. And then the point about, you playing small does not serve the world. To me, that's what leadership is that it is not playing small. It is sometimes saying the things that need to be said or doing things that need to be done. It doesn't always mean that everyone's going to like it. And that's the other part of it.
That's the hard part, right?
That's
Sometimes
the
being
hard part.
the lone person standing up saying no or saying we're not going to
Yeah.
do that. And we used to call it managerial courage. And
Mm.
so I talk about that with people because I'm a huge fan of being a respected leader versus a liked leader. And I think so many
Mhm.
people are in people pleasing mode and trying to be liked by everyone that they may not make the best decisions for the organization, for themselves, for the team. And it's really interesting when they start to say, respect it. I never even thought about it. So I think anybody could do it and just start with a question that needs to be asked and no one else is asking it. And
And
you'll
everybody
probably,
is dying for you to ask it or
right,
somebody to
right.
ask it.
Please ask it,
Yeah.
someone, please. Is there anything else you want to add from the book that I didn't ask you about?
And so, I mean, there's a lot in there, right? It's not just about understanding and managing yourself, but it's about, how do you make decisions? And one thing I will say is that it's really, really important that you do those exercises in the beginning because that's the red thread throughout the whole book, right? It
Hmm.
pulls it all forward in terms of how do you make decisions and for yourself and other people. But I just wanted to hit on what you just said about being respected versus liked. I think that's a nuanced and very important distinction because if you are liked and you make a decision that people don't agree with, now you're not liked, and that's really hard.
Yeah.
But if you're respected, people will think, oh, Sue is a really good leader, and she has made good decisions in the past. I may not agree with what she decided, but I trust her. One of the things that I do also say in the book is your job as a leader is not to make everybody happy all the time because
Yes.
you can't. You can't.
It's not
And
possible.
also, sometimes when you're thinking long term, you're making decisions for the long term. And not everybody is going to think that way. So I just love what you just said for that
Mhm.
reason, because I think I don't say it that way in the book, but that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Well, you said it brilliantly. I think there's just something about the trust factor too, right? Because if I'm making a decision that people don't agree with, hopefully they know me well enough to know that I have thought it through and I'm not making it
Mhm.
on a whim and that there is a bigger picture behind the scenes. And I try to be pretty transparent and vulnerable with my teams usually because I want them to understand how I made that decision or what I did to get to that decision so that they can start to learn how to do it for themselves as well. And I think that is something that a lot of people don't do. They'll just say, just do it because I told you to,
Uh-huh.
versus here's how I came to that. And I don't know. To me, I was lucky enough to have some great role models that helped me with that. And I
Mhm.
hope to have more people doing that just through my coaching or through conversations. So, yeah, pretty amazing stuff out there. The leadership world, I thought when I first started writing my book, I think AJ said to us to go Google how many leadership books, and it was like billions. It
Oh
was so,
gosh.
so
Yeah.
huge, right? But I think we all bring our own stories and unique experiences and perspectives to it that really make it shine for the people who need it. And that's
Mm.
what I love about yours. So here's a question. What helped you to be able to step into bigger rooms and roles along the way in your career?
Mhm.
Because you were in some pretty, I mean, not everybody works for Deloitte. That is probably a rare group of people that get into Deloitte. And then you go into bigger rooms, and now you went to Harvard and MIT, which some people might be a little bit intimidated by. So
Mm.
I'm curious how all of those transitions went for you.
Yeah, I would say that throughout my career, more and more I followed my curiosity. That if anything sparked my interest or curiosity, or like I'd think, I would sort of investigate it. And that has always helped me. So I would say that finding your place, finding your fit, whether it's, a technical or functional area, going with what you really care about. I generally think that if you are not intrinsically motivated by the work, you might be good at it, but you're never going to be great at it. As I went through my career, I started going towards what I was interested in and not necessarily what perhaps my parents thought was a good thing. Or maybe society would say, why did you make this left-hand turn? And, my thought was, because it felt right to me.
Hmm.
And I think that's important that when something feels right to you, it means you're kind of in the right place. Yeah. So I think when you're comfortable with yourself and you're comfortable with what your knowledge is and things like that, it changes things. And you're just much more willing to say what your opinion is, even if it's maybe not the opinion of everybody else in the room.
Well, that's great advice. Yeah, I think it's that whole building of your own confidence, your own self trust that you're doing what's right for you. And that's something I wish I would have learned earlier. And I think I try to instill in as many people as possible now, and including my kids, right? If you can learn that lesson, it just helps your confidence along the
Mm.
way for the rest of your life. And that was something I didn't have for a really long time. So take her advice. You will be so far ahead of so many people in the world for sure. Okay. Well, we are going to transition into the 4 questions that I ask every guest. So the first one is, what do you think visibility is and why did you answer that way?
Oh, wow. That's a super good question. So I would say visibility, I do think it means different things to different people, right? Which is probably why you asked that question. But to me, visibility, there's that old saying of there's no such thing as bad PR, right? And I think, oh, yes, there is. Yes, there is. But visibility means being seen by the people that you want to see you. Right, being heard by the people that you want to hear you, and so that's why I think if you find your place, you found your people, right? You found your audience, and for a good chunk of my life, that's been higher education. I remember somebody said one time, it's like touching the future, and I thought, my gosh, that's exactly what it is. When
That's
you work
cool.
with students, because I've been an administrator in higher ed at MIT and at Harvard, and I've been in the classroom, and both are awesome. And you get to see people with very different backgrounds, perspectives, opinions, and things like that. And I like that. I like everybody doesn't have to agree with me, but let's, be respectful as we disagree kind of thing. So to me, visibility is being seen and heard by the people that you want to be with.
That's amazing. What are you doing to be visible?
Probably not enough, but no, I mean, I continue to teach, which I love. I do work at various units at Harvard Medical School, Division of Continuing Ed, and things like that, and I love it. And they're all different audiences as well, totally different, makeup of what they're trying to do. I also do, some private client work and things like that. I post a little bit on LinkedIn and things like that, and I think some things that resonate with me resonate with other people, and to me, that's the resonance. I think is what's important for me.
Yeah.
And if I also think that there are times when there's a message that is ultimately important, but you're not ready to hear it, and I think yeah, it's okay too. That's
Yeah.
okay too.
Yeah. Maybe 5 years from now, you'll hear it again and you'll be ready.
Exactly, exactly. It's like, oh, that's what they meant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the saying? When the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Oh,
And,
yes. And how many
that,
times has that been true in
oh,
life?
for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, that was chapter one of my book. That was the title. There were so many teachers that showed up for me in that moment that I had to talk about it.
Yeah.
What is the best career or leadership advice you've ever received?
Oh gosh. Actually, and I think I mentioned this in the book, is that when I was working in consulting, I was in a meeting with a senior partner and a client. And after the meeting, the senior partner asked me, he said, "How do you think the meeting went?" And I said, "Oh, I think it went well." And he said, "How do you think you did in the meeting?" And I'm like, like, I had no idea what to say. And he he lets me kind of be uncomfortable for a minute, and then he said, "Right." He said, "You didn't say much at the meeting." And then he said, "I want you to realize that clients are gonna make up their mind about the value that you bring to the team by what you say in meetings." And he said, "You didn't say much at that meeting." So he said, "There's a big question mark in that client's head right now about, why is she on this team?" And he said, "I know you have a lot of good ideas and things like that because you mentioned them to me." He said, "But you didn't say them." And the best advice, he said, "I think you're an introvert." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, "So this is going to be harder for you." He said, before every meeting, he said, think about 3 points that you might make about what we're going to talk about, and 3 questions that you could pose or you yourself have about it. And he said, and in the meeting, launch into one of them early. And it was fabulous advice, although I was on an S curve and I made a ton of mistakes in implementing his advice, including, derailing conversations by, jumping in and moving the conversation sideways and things like that. But over time, I learned how to do it. And you know what? It was great advice.
Yeah. And I hadn't heard the launch into it early, but I love that because put yourself out there early and then it just calms you down for the rest of the meeting so you
Yeah,
can
well, that was his
participate.
point too. Yeah, he said, you're going to be in the game now.
Mhm.
Now you're part of the conversation. So he said your second point or question is going to come much more naturally
Yeah.
and you will be in the conversation. He said, but the longer you wait, the more anxious you're going to become, which is
Yes.
absolutely true.
So true. So true. Okay. Last question is, what is a book that you've maybe recently read or that you would recommend that you love?
Oh gosh, fiction or nonfiction?
I don't know, whichever you pick. I've had both on the show, so
Yeah, I would say I was, and it's very top of mind because I was just having this discussion with somebody. I would say almost anything by Wallace Stegner.
oh,
He writes a lot about the West, and he won the Pulitzer Prize many years ago for Angle of Repose, which I really did love. But it's one of those ones where it stayed with me for a long time.
oh,
And the other one is Crossing to Safety, which is also a really good one as well. So he just
nice.
understands people, right? That's what novelists do. They show
Hmm.
us, a different perspective or ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I will grab those and put links in the show notes so that people can find them. And if they want to learn more about you, where would you like them to reach out to you?
Oh, the best place usually is LinkedIn. That's really the only social media where I hang out. I think I'm Margaret C. Andrews on that. I'm not sure about that, but there's probably a few Margaret Andrews, but only one wearing a black turtleneck and black and white photo. So that would be me. Or you can find me on my website, which is margaretandrews.com.
Yes. And for those of you watching the video of this, you can see that Margaret and I did not plan this ahead, but we are dressed very similarly and feel like we are kindred spirits because of
Yes.
our styles in many ways. Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for writing this book. And I think giving people just a little peek under the tent of what it would be like to be in your class and get to experience that. I think that's just an amazing gift.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.